The air on Karis Station tasted of copper and desperation. Vin Carrick pulled his respirator closer to his weathered face as he navigated the crowded corridors, the artificial gravity stuttering beneath his feet, like an old engine missing its rhythm. At 58, the former Earth Marine had seen enough battlefields to know when a place was dying. Karis Station was dying slowly, one failed atmospheric processor at a time. The exotic creatures market sprawled before him like a carnival of the condemned. Bioluminescent fish swam in perfect spheres of synthesized water, their light pulsing in distress patterns only they understood. Crystalline spiders clicked against their containment fields, creating tiny sparks that illuminated their prismatic bodies. But Vin wasn't here for the usual trade in pretty pets or biochemical oddities. He clutched the data crystal in his pocket, its surface warm against his palm. Dr. Elena Solaris had been dead for 3 years, but her final research lived on in the crystalline matrix he carried. The Vegan civilization records, she'd called them. Songs that mapped star systems, harmonies that encoded genetic sequences, a musical language that bridged the gap between science and soul. The auction hall hummed with the low murmur of traders, smugglers, and collectors. A Thraxian merchant argued loudly with a human buyer over the price of a cage full of singing crystals. The smell of ozone hung thick in the air from poorly maintained containment fields. Vin pushed through the crowd, following the directions his contact had given him. Then he saw them. 8 cylindrical tanks arranged in a semicircle, each containing what looked like a miniature dragon. They were no bigger than his forearm, with scales that shifted color like oil on water. Delicate wings pressed against the curved walls of their prisons, and their eyes held an intelligence that made Vin's chest tighten. As he approached, one of the creatures turned its head toward him, and for a moment he could have sworn it smiled. The auctioneer's voice boomed over the crowd. Lot 17-8, juvenile specimens of Draconis vaganus, commonly known as chorus dragons. Excellent for genetic research or private collections. Bidding starts at 20,000 credits. Vin's hand moved to the data crystal. According to Dr. Solaris's research, the Vegan civilization had vanished mysteriously 500 years ago, leaving behind only ruins and these dragons. But she'd discovered something else, something that had cost her career and eventually her life. The dragons weren't just animals. They were living libraries, carriers of an entire culture's worth of knowledge, encoded in their songs. Do I hear 20,000? The auctioneer, a thin man with cybernetic implants covering half his skull, scanned the crowd. Several hands went up. 25, do I hear 30? Each bid was another nail in the dragon's coffin. Vin had seen the documentation the station was using. Forged papers claiming these were bred in captivity, domesticated animals with no sentient rights. But the data crystal contained proof that the Vegan dragons were far more than that. The bidding climbed to 60,000 credits. Vin watched as various collectors and research corporations signaled their interest. A representative from Stellar Genomics made a bid of 75,000. The dragons huddled together in their tanks, their scales fading to a dull gray that spoke of resignation. 80,000 credits. The call came from behind Vin. A woman in a crisp corporate uniform held up her bidding paddle. The logo on her jacket identified her as working for Galactic Corporate Authority, one of the largest biotech conglomerates in the galaxy. The auctioneer smiled. 80,000 to the lady from GCA, do I hear? I challenge the legality of this sale. The words were out of Vin's mouth before he fully realized he'd spoken. The auction hall fell silent, all eyes turning to him. The auctioneer's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Vin. Sir, this is a legally sanctioned auction. All specimens have proper documentation. Documentation that's falsified. Vin pulled out the data crystal and held it up for all to see. I have scientific evidence that these creatures are sentient beings, protected under the Galactic Accords on sapient species rights. A murmur ran through the crowd. The auctioneer's human eye narrowed while his cybernetic one continued to whir. That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Carrick. Vin Carrick, former Earth Marine Corps. He stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades giving orders in combat zones. And, according to subsection 47 alpha of the station's trade regulations, any auction can be halted pending verification of Sapiens claims. The GCA representative stood up, her face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. These animals are legally acquired livestock. I demand— You demand nothing. Vin turned to face her, and she took an involuntary step back. Something in his eyes, perhaps the weight of all the battles he'd fought, made her pause. The law is clear. If there's credible evidence of sapience, the sale must be suspended pending investigation. The auctioneer's cybernetic implants sparked slightly as he accessed the station's legal database. After a moment, his shoulders sagged. The Terran is correct. Station Regulation 47A does allow for such challenges. However, Mr. Carrick, you'll need to provide substantial proof within 24 hours, or the sale will proceed. Vin nodded curtly. I'll need temporary custody of the specimens for testing. Absolutely not, the GCA woman began. The law requires it. The auctioneer interrupted clearly, wanting to avoid further complications. Mr. Carrick, you'll be responsible for the specimen's welfare during the investigation period. Any harm that comes to them will result in severe penalties. Understood. 20 minutes later, Vin found himself in a hastily arranged holding area, deep within the station's research sector. The 8 dragons had been transferred to a larger, more comfortable containment unit, with proper atmospheric controls and artificial sunlight. They moved more freely now, their scales beginning to regain some of their earlier luster. Vin connected the data crystal to a portable research terminal and began uploading Dr. Solaris's files. As the data transferred, he studied the dragons more closely. They were beautiful creatures with scales that seemed to contain tiny stars and wings that barely fit within the confines of their prison. I know you can understand me, he said quietly. Dr. Solaris spent 20 years studying your species. She knew what you really are. One of the dragons, slightly larger than the others, pressed against the transparent aluminum wall of the tank. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of tiny pearl-like teeth, and it began to emit a sound unlike anything Vin had ever heard. It wasn't quite singing, wasn't quite humming. The sound seemed to exist in multiple frequencies at once, creating harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. Soon, the other dragons joined in, their voices blending into something that was less music than it was pure communication. The research terminal chimed as the data transfer completed. Vin opened Dr. Solaris's files, his eyes scanning decades of painstaking research. The Vegan civilization had been unlike any other known sapient species. They hadn't built monuments or written books. Instead, they had encoded their entire culture into their language, a complex system of musical phrases that could convey everything from historical events to scientific formulas. The dragons were the keepers of this language. Each one was born with a portion of the cultural database encoded in their DNA, expressed through their unique vocal abilities. Together, they could recreate the endless song, the complete repository of vegan knowledge. But there was more. Dr. Solaris had discovered that the dragons didn't just memorize the songs. They understood them. They were intelligent, emotional beings who carried the weight of their extinct creator's legacy. Vin looked up from the terminal as the dragon's song grew louder. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, now reverberating through the walls and floor of the research lab. Other equipment in the room began to resonate in harmony, creating an otherworldly chorus that made Vin's skin prickle. The door to the lab burst open, and the GCA representative stormed in, followed by 2 security guards. "What have you done?" she demanded. "The entire station can hear them." Indeed, the dragon's song had somehow propagated through the station's communication systems. Vin could hear it echoing from speakers throughout the complex, and through the viewports, he could see people stopping in the corridors to listen. "They're broadcasting their proof of sapience," Vin said calmly. This is the endless song Dr. Solaris wrote about. Mathematical equations encoded in melody. Historical records in harmony. Only a truly intelligent species could create something this complex. The woman's face went white. You don't understand what you're dealing with. These creatures are worth billions to my company. The genetic research alone could revolutionize medicine, agriculture, even terraforming technology. They're not property, Vin replied. They're people. The song reached a crescendo, and suddenly Vin could understand fragments of it. Star charts sung in minor keys. The chemical composition of atmosphere rendered in haunting harmonics. The story of a species that had chosen to become one with their environment, rather than dominate it, preserving their knowledge in the only vessels capable of carrying it across the centuries. The security guards moved forward, but Vin held up a hand. I wouldn't do that. According to the data I've uploaded to the station's mainframe, any attempt to harm or forcibly move a member of a protected sapient species is a Class A felony under galactic law. The GCA woman pulled out a handheld device and barked orders into it. Get me Director Voss immediately. Yes, sir. The situation has changed. The specimens they're transmitting. The entire station knows about them now. As if responding to her words, the dragon's song grew even more complex. Vin felt tears streaming down his face as he began to understand what he was hearing. It wasn't just information being transmitted. It was emotion, joy at being heard after so long, grief for their lost creators, hope for the future. Galactic Corporate Authority. The voice came from behind them. A man in an expensive suit strode into the lab, flanked by more security personnel. His face was hard, his eyes calculating. Mr. Carrick, I presume I'm Director Marcus Voss. You've caused quite a stir with your little demonstration. Vin turned to face the newcomer, noting the way the man's security detail spread out in a classic tactical formation. Old habits died hard, and Vin found himself automatically assessing threats and escape routes. Director, I trust you've had time to review the evidence I submitted to the station authorities. Voss smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh yes, Dr. Solaris's research. Fascinating work, though largely theoretical. You see, Mr. Carrick, even if these creatures possess some rudimentary intelligence, they're still legally property of my corporation. We've invested considerable resources in acquiring them. Under false pretenses, Vin countered. The documentation claims they're domesticated animals. That's fraud. Prove it, Voss gestured to the dragons. Show me where in galactic law it states that the ability to make noise constitutes proof of sapience. Because that's all this is, noise. Elaborate noise perhaps, but noise nonetheless. The dragon's song faltered for a moment, and Vin saw something like hurt flash across their delicate features. They understood every word being said about them. You want proof? Vin moved to the research terminal and began typing. Fine. Computer analyze the transmitted audio patterns for mathematical sequences. The terminal hummed for a moment before displaying the results. Analysis complete. Audio transmission contains 47 distinct mathematical proofs, including solutions to previously unsolved problems in quantum mechanics and xenobiology. Voss frowned. Impressive programming, but hardly proof of original thought. Computer, identify any repeated sequences or loops in the transmission. Negative. All sequences are unique and continuously evolving. Probability of this being pre-programmed data approaches 0. The dragons seemed to sense the tension in the room. Their song shifted, becoming more focused, more urgent. Suddenly, one of them, the largest one that had first approached Vin, began a solo performance. The melody it sang was hauntingly beautiful, but more than that, it was clearly a story. Vin watched as the dragon's companions responded with harmonized counterpoints, adding layers to the narrative being told. Through the music, they painted a picture of Vin himself, his arrival at the station, his challenge to the auction, his efforts to help them. It was a song about hope. They're composing, Vin said quietly. In real time. About us. About what's happening right now. No programmed response could do that. Voss's confident demeanor cracked slightly. That doesn't change the legal reality. These creatures are corporate assets. I have documentation. Forged documentation, Vin interrupted. And even if it weren't sapient, beings cannot be owned. That's fundamental galactic law. Laws can be interpreted. Voss signaled to his security team. I'm invoking corporate privilege under emergency provisions. These specimens are coming with us for immediate study. Like hell they are. Vin stepped between the security guards and the dragon's containment unit. Behind him, the creature's song grew louder, more defiant. He could feel their trust in him, and it hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't felt needed like this since his Marine days, hadn't felt like he had a purpose worth fighting for. Stand aside, Mr. Carrick, Voss ordered. You have no legal authority here. Maybe not, Vin agreed, but they do. He turned back to the dragons and spoke slowly, clearly. Can you transmit your song beyond this station to the galactic communication networks? The largest dragon tilted its head, studying him with ancient eyes. Then, it began to sing again. This time, the melody was different, questioning testing. The other dragons joined in, their voices rising in a complex harmony that seemed to reach out through the very walls of the station. The research terminal began displaying incoming communication requests from across the galaxy. News networks, xenobiologist societies, government representatives. The dragon song was being broadcast far beyond Kara Station, carrying with it not just beautiful music but irrefutable proof of an intelligent, emotionally complex species. What have you done? Voss whispered, his face pale. Leveled the playing field, Vin replied. Your corporate lawyers might be able to tie up a single research station in legal red tape, but you can't silence the entire galaxy. Everyone knows about them now. Everyone knows their people. The dragon's song had become a celebration, a joyous anthem that spoke of freedom and recognition. Other sapient species throughout the galaxy were responding, adding their own voices to the chorus through the communication networks. It was the first truly universal song in galactic history. Voss's device buzzed with incoming calls. He glanced at it and paled further. This isn't over, Carrick. My corporation has resources you can't imagine. Resources to fight the entire Galactic Council. Vin smiled grimly. Because that's what you'll be doing. The song is out there now. The proof is undeniable. These beings are under galactic protection whether you like it or not. The security guards looked uncertain, glancing between their director and the singing dragons. Even they seemed affected by the music, their hostile postures softening slightly. Sir, one of them said hesitantly, maybe we should wait for legal clarification. If they're really sapient. They're animals, Voss snapped. Extremely clever animals, but animals nonetheless. The potential profits from their genetic material alone could fund a dozen colony worlds. And there it is, Vin said quietly. Your real motivation, not science, not knowledge, profit. The dragon's song shifted again, taking on a mournful tone. They were singing about their creators, Vin realized. About a species that had valued harmony over conquest, preservation over profit. The Vegans had disappeared because they couldn't adapt to a galaxy increasingly dominated by corporate interests and aggressive expansion. But they had left their most precious gift, their children, the carriers of their culture and values. And now, those children were making their voices heard. The Galactic Council has issued a preliminary injunction. The station controller's voice came over the intercom. All sapient beings identified as Vegan chorus dragons are hereby placed under emergency protection, pending full investigation. Any attempt to harm, remove, or experiment upon them will be considered an act of violence against a protected species. Voss's shoulders sagged. Around him, his security team lowered their weapons and stepped back. The legal implications were clear, and even corporate power had its limits when faced with galactic law. This is a temporary setback, he said, his voice strained. We'll challenge this in every court in the galaxy if necessary. You do that, Vin replied. But these dragons aren't going anywhere with you. As if to emphasize the point, the dragon's song rose to another crescendo, this time incorporating elements of what Vin could only describe as legal language. They were claiming asylum, he realized. They were formally requesting protection under galactic law, and they were doing it in a way that no court could ignore or misinterpret. The next several hours passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media interviews, and scientific examinations. Vin found himself appointed as the dragon's temporary guardian, while the Galactic Council deliberated on their status. Teams of xenolinguists and xenopsychologists arrived to study the creatures, all confirming what the dragons had already proven through their song. They were unquestionably sapient, intelligent, and possessed of rich emotional lives. Dr. Helena Vasquez, the leading expert on sapient species recognition, spent hours listening to the dragon's songs. When she emerged from her final session, her eyes were bright with tears. "It's remarkable," she told Vin. "They're not just intelligent, they're wise. They carry the accumulated knowledge of an entire civilization. But more than that, they've added their own experiences, their own perspectives. The endless song is still growing." "What happens now?" Vin asked. "The Council will need to make a formal ruling, but that's just a formality at this point. They'll be granted full sapient rights. The question is, what do they want? Where do they want to go?" Vin had been wondering the same thing. The dragons had been effectively refugees, their entire lives kept in captivity, by those who saw them only as curiosities or research subjects. But they were free now, or would be soon. What did freedom mean to beings who carried the weight of an extinct civilization? He found his answer that evening when he visited them in their temporary habitat. The dragons had been moved to a much larger facility, one designed for comfort rather than containment. They had room to fly, albeit limited, and their scales had regained their full luminescence. The largest dragon approached him as he entered. Up close, Vin could see the ancient intelligence in its eyes, the weight of thousands of years of genetic memory. When it sang to him this time, the song was gentle, personal. It was sharing something with him alone. Through the melody it showed him images, memories passed down through generations of dragons. The Vegan homeworld before its death. Cities that floated on streams of music rather than technology. A civilization that had chosen to preserve rather than expand, to nurture rather than exploit. But there were other images too. Vegan ruins scattered throughout the galaxy. Hidden sanctuaries where dragon eggs had been hidden centuries ago. Places where the endless song could be completed, where the full knowledge of a lost civilization could be preserved for the future. "You want to go home?" Vin whispered. The dragon's reply was wordless, but unmistakable. Yes, home. Not to the dead world where their creators had lived, but to the places where their legacy could live on. Over the following days, as legal proceedings wrapped up and the dragon's sapient status was officially recognized, Vin found himself making plans he hadn't expected. His ship, a decommissioned marine transport he'd retrofitted for civilian use, was old, but reliable. More importantly, it had the range to reach the outer systems where most of the Vegan ruins lay. "You don't have to do this," Dr. Vasquez told him, as they stood in the station's docking bay. The dragons waited nearby in a specially designed transport pod that would keep them comfortable during the long journey. "Yes, I do," Vin replied. "They saved me as much as I saved them. Before this, I was just existing, going through the motions. They gave me a purpose again." The dragons sang softly as they boarded his ship, their melody, one of gratitude and anticipation. As Vin ran through his pre-flight checklist, he felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. The war nightmares that had haunted his sleep for years seemed distant, now replaced by dreams of ancient songs and star-filled skies. The journey to the first Vegan site took 3 weeks. During that time, Vin learned more about the dragons than any textbook could have taught him. They were individuals, each with their own personality, their own section of the endless song to preserve. They taught him some of their simpler melodies, and he found that singing along helped ease the loneliness of deep space travel. Their destination was a small moon, orbiting a gas giant in the Beta Centauri system. Long-range scans showed extensive ruins, and spectral analysis suggested structures that resonated with specific frequencies. It was the dragons indicated through their songs, one of the great libraries of their people. As they approached the moon's surface, the dragons' excitement was palpable. Their songs grew more complex, more urgent. They were calling out to something trying to make contact with whatever remained of their heritage. The landing was smooth, and Vin led the dragons out of the ship onto the surface of the moon. The ruins stretched out before them, beautiful and alien in the pale light of the distant sun. Towers that seemed to grow from the rock itself spiraled upward, their surfaces covered in intricate patterns that Vin suspected were more than mere decoration. The dragons spread their wings and took flight for the first time in years. Their joy was infectious, their songs echoing off the ancient stones and creating harmonies that seemed to awaken something in the ruins themselves. Crystals, embedded in the structures, began to glow, responding to the dragons' voices. Vin watched in wonder as the dragons landed on different towers throughout the complex. Each one began to sing a different melody, and as their voices combined, the entire ruin came alive with light and sound. The endless song was finding its home again. For hours, the dragons sang their voices, unlocking chambers that had been sealed for centuries. Ancient Vegan artifacts emerged from hidden compartments, crystalline matrices that contained art, music, and knowledge from the lost civilization. The dragons gathered these treasures carefully, their songs explaining their significance to Vin. As the moon sun began to set, casting the ruins in shades of gold and purple, the dragons returned to where Vin waited. Their song now was one of completion, of fulfillment. They had reclaimed part of their heritage, but more than that, they had ensured its preservation for future generations. There are other sites. The largest dragon communicated through its melody. Other pieces of the song to recover. Vin nodded. Then we'll visit them all. And they did. Over the next year, they traveled from system to system, seeking out the hidden repositories of vegan knowledge. With each site they visited, the dragon songs grew richer, more complete. They were rebuilding their culture, adding their own experiences to the ancient melodies. Word of their journey spread throughout the galaxy. Other members of lost civilizations came forward, sharing their own stories of preservation and rediscovery. The dragon's example had inspired a movement, a recognition that knowledge and culture were as valuable as any physical commodity. Young xenobiologists and cultural anthropologists requested to join their expedition. Vin carefully vetted each applicant, accepting only those who showed genuine respect for the dragons and their mission. Soon, his ship was home to a small but dedicated crew of researchers and diplomats. The dragons seemed to enjoy the company. They taught songs to those who showed aptitude, shared their knowledge freely with those who approached them with respect and humility. The endless song was growing again, incorporating new voices and new perspectives while maintaining its essential character. As for Vin, he found a contentment he'd never known in his military service. The constant travel suited him, and the knowledge that he was helping preserve something precious gave his life a meaning that simple survival had never provided. On the anniversary of their rescue from Kara Station, they held a celebration. The dragons sang their stories of the past year, of friends made, knowledge recovered, and hope renewed. They sang of Vin, too, the soldier who had traded his weapons for wisdom, violence for preservation. Standing on the observation deck of his ship, watching the dragons soar through space itself, in specially designed atmospheric suits, Vin reflected on how much his life had changed. He had been a warrior, once trained to destroy. Now he was a guardian, dedicated to preservation. The galaxy was a vast, often hostile place, full of those who would exploit the vulnerable for profit. But it was also filled with wonder, with beauty, with songs that could bridge the gap between species and centuries. The dragons had taught him that some things were worth fighting for, not because they could be conquered, but because they deserved to exist. As the dragons returned to the ship, their scales glowing with bioluminescent joy, Vin smiled. Tomorrow would bring another star system, another opportunity to recover lost knowledge or protect something precious. The endless song would continue, and he would be there to help it grow. The copper taste of Kara Station was a distant memory, now replaced by the sweet recycled air of his ship and the even sweeter sound of dragon songs. Vin Carrick had found his purpose at last, not in war, but in the preservation of peace. And in doing so, he had given 8 young dragons the chance to sing their ancestors' songs among the stars. He had also given the galaxy something it didn't know. It needed proof that some things were more valuable than profit, more important than progress. The dragons were living libraries, repositories of wisdom that couldn't be quantified or commodified. They were in their way sacred. And they were free. In the years that followed, the dragons' influence spread throughout the galaxy. Their songs inspired new art forms, new ways of thinking about culture and preservation. Legislation was passed, protecting cultural carriers like them. The Galactic Council established the Vegan Memorial Archive, a massive space station dedicated to preserving the knowledge of extinct civilizations. The dragons were appointed as the first cultural ambassadors in galactic history, their songs serving as a bridge between species that had previously struggled to communicate. They traveled throughout known space, sharing their music and learning from others. Vin remained their guardian and friend until the end of his days. When he finally passed peacefully in his sleep aboard the ship that had become his home, the dragons sang for him a song of gratitude that lasted 3 days and could be heard across 5 star systems. They buried him on the first moon they had liberated together near the ruins where he had first seen them truly free. His grave was marked not with stone or metal, but with a crystal formation that resonated with their songs, ensuring that his memory would live on as long as the dragons sang. And they sang forever, as dragons do, keeping alive the memory of a man who had chosen preservation over profit, wisdom over war. The endless song had room for everyone who believed in its message, and Vin Carrick's part in it would never be forgotten. The universe was a better place for their music, and it was a better place because one old soldier had chosen to listen when they sang for help. In saving them, he had saved something essential about what it meant to be truly alive: the drive to preserve beauty, to protect the innocent, and to ensure that no song, no matter how ancient or alien, was allowed to fade into silence. The dragons carried more than just the knowledge of the Vegans now. They carried the hope that rational beings could choose understanding over ignorance, cooperation over conflict, preservation over destruction. And in their endless song that hope would live forever.